This conference will now be recorded.
I know that some of you have joined us for previous webinars, and so you are probably aware that EcoQuip Plus is a collaborative project within the healthcare sector, and it focuses on the public procurement of innovation. In today's webinar, we will look at how the tendering process can hinder innovation or instead be designed to enable innovative solutions to compete equally with established goods and services. My EcoQuip colleague, Gaynor Wiles, is an expert in this area, and she will lead the session today. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Gaynor and I will pick up on the questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayley, and welcome everyone to this final webinar in our series. We've been through sort of logical process since the spring, looking at the forward commitment procurement as a methodology for innovation procurement, and we also find it a really useful framework for training and action learning programs. So as Hayley mentioned, what we were talking about today is pro-innovation tendering, and what I want to do is look at a case example about how tendering can unintentionally hinder innovation, look at some principles and practices of pro-innovation tendering, which I think many of you will be familiar with, and then look at some case examples of pro-innovation tendering. So what we've been looking at through this series is a three-stage process of innovation procurement, and this is where we find ourselves now, pro-innovation tendering. And this is all about enabling suppliers to compete equally on a level playing field with established solutions. And at this point, you put an awful lot of time, effort and work into the innovation procurement process. But unless that is followed through to the tendering stage, much of that might be lost. So I think this is a really important part of the process. This is the methodology that we've been working through, and this is our focus today. So let's look at this example of where the tendering approach can block the adoption of innovation. Very often, the procurement processes that we have in place they tend to sort of roll out the same solutions, and people have referred to it as the procurement conveyor belt, where it's basically that a tender process is run, something is purchased, a contract is in place, it comes to the end, and then we just repeat the cycle again. And this means that if we're actually staying tied into and not questioning those specifications, new innovations don't have an opportunity to come forward. And without those customers, we lose the opportunities that could be brought by new solutions. And also what we find is that without first adopters of new solutions, many prototypes, pilot projects, really good ideas just fall by the wayside. And of course, that's a loss for everyone. That means that companies have invested resources, they've invested time and effort to come up with a solution, and they never really make it through that mountain of risk that we talked about in an earlier session. So let's look at this specific example, which came from some work we were doing with colleagues in Optimat for the UK innovation community. Okay, so in the UK, we have city authorities, and these city authorities are responsible for maintaining the highways, and that includes managing drains and gullies. Okay, but very often these days, these services are outsourced to contractors, and apparently that's done at quite a lot of cost. A lot of that trend towards outsourcing has been increasing in recent years. The other thing that we're finding is that the risk of flooding in urban areas is increasing. We've got changes in weather patterns. We often get quite significant, heavy rain in a short space of time. And we also find in urban areas that are under pressure for vehicles, for example, that very often what were grassy areas are being concreted over for example, front gardens, to create parking spaces for more cars. And this increases water runoff into and puts more pressure on the drainage system. We've also had a series of flooding events, large flooding events in the UK, and they cause a huge amount of disruption, but also an awful lot of public health problems, stress, and it's a really distressing thing, for example, that you can't get to your business, or that you can't get insurance at a reasonable price anymore because of the risk of flooding has actually increased so much. So there is a solution that could help this, that really improves the effectiveness and indeed the efficiency of gully management and reduce costs for local authorities, for city authorities. And this is a technology that uses smart sensors, self-learning technology, the Internet of Things, AI, integrating with a large amount of weather data and weather data predictions. And that solution it's called Smart Water, this particular version of it that we've got this case example from. And it can actually predict when the gullies need cleaning or maintaining. It can provide early alerts on, for example, if pollutants had been released, or indeed if there was a flood risk. And it can predict the likelihood of flooding in each of these drains. And critically, it means you can target maintenance specifically when it's needed and where it is needed. And this kind of solution has been shown to achieve really significant cost reductions of 30 to 40%. However, the way in which tenders are operated for the maintenance of gullies tends to be based on a really strict management regime, which is based on the number and the frequency of maintenance. And that means that the contract and the tender specification will say the contractor must visit each gully a fixed number of times per year. And that means that that contract is really easy to manage, because you can check, has each drain been visited, and has it been cleared? You know, what has basically been going on? What have the contractors been doing? So that's a really easy contract to manage. And the payments are made based on a per drain visit basis. But what we find is that 80% of drains are in fact clean and running when they're visited and require no attention. They just get checked saying, oh yes, they are clear. And here we have an example of where the contractor is paid for the visit and not for the outcome. So what happens then? You know, so the new technology would actually say, well, we don't want to base this on the number of visits. We want to base this on the right visit at the right time, targeting intervention when it's needed. And of course, this leads to much better value and much better outcomes. What we're saying here is that if you specify visits per year, innovative solutions can't compete with that, because their value and their benefits are not visible to the customer. Because obviously it's going to cost money to put these in place, but at the same time it can deliver savings. But what you wouldn't want to do is to still carry on visiting each drain on a specified date, specified time. In this particular example, what we found was that the operational staff were really interested in the technology and in fact been running trials of this solution. However, they didn't understand how the procurement process worked, and there was no communication between the operational staff and the procurement professionals. And this breakdown meant that the tender specification went out just the same as normal, specifying a certain number of visits over a certain amount of time for each gully. And therefore, this solution that they'd been trying just couldn't come forward and compete with that. So not only is the learning about better interdepartmental communication understanding, it's actually also about stopping the procurement conveyor belt, stopping this automatic renewal of the same process without thinking about it. So we're going to be talking about pro-innovation tendering, and as we've gone through this process, what we've seen is that we've gone through a really logical progression of accurately defining the requirement. We've talked to stakeholders, we've made sure that the project is embedded within the organisation, we've engaged with and consulted the supply chain, and we've looked carefully at the market response and produced a market-sounding market engagement report. So we've got a huge amount of knowledge and understanding. We're in a really much better position than where we were at the beginning of this process. The next step is designing the tendering process in a way that supports and enables innovative solutions to be presented on a level playing field with established solutions. And that means thinking carefully about the consequences of how we are going to run our tendering process. What we know is that all innovation procurements are not equal. Each one is unique. Each sector that we're working in is unique in the way it's managed, in the way it delivers through its supply chains. So what we can't do is being highly specific about what happens in pro-innovation tendering, but we can look at some of the principles and practices that you might want to bring into this stage of the process. And the question I think we have to ask ourselves is, what is the tendering approach that would enable our suppliers to deliver what we need, when we need it, at a price that reflects the value placed on it by the organisation and indeed society? How should we go about doing this to make sure that we enable suppliers to compete on a level playing field? And this is something I said right at the outset when we were thinking about understanding our requirements accurately, is at this stage you can't outsource that thinking. You've got to take your understanding, the knowledge you've gained through the process, and apply it to address this question. How can we support the supply chain to deliver what we need? And what we find is that it's really easy to revert to what we might call usual tendering processes at this stage. Because when we're dealing with innovation, people do tend to get a bit nervous about, oh, is it going to work? Is it going to be delivered? What if nobody responds to our tender? We're not going to end up with a solution at all. So it's very easy to say, okay, well, we've done all that really good innovation procurement good practice, and now we're just going to go off and buy in exactly the same way as we did before. So what I would recommend, and this is a tool that we use in many of the projects, is that we develop pro-innovation tendering strategy, which basically sets out what we will do to enable and encourage innovative solutions in the tendering process. And it's not a document you're going to share with the supply chain. It is an internal document that basically says this is the approach that we're going to take in order that we can give ourselves the best chance of getting the outcomes that we're looking for. Really helpful to get that signed off at an appropriate level, because then as the project team, as the award team go into the tendering process, they can really feel confident that their management is behind them. And a strategy is not a complicated thing. It's how we're going, what is it we want to achieve? How are we going to achieve it? And why? Why are we doing it this way? And it's a really good exercise for your team to actually go through. In itself, it offers a pause in the process to say, okay, what have we learned? Let's reflect on all the information that we've learned, and let's apply the insights that we've gained from the market, probably also from other buyers, and actually bring these forward and develop our innovation tendering strategy. It also means that before you start the award process, the evaluation and awarding process, you can actually see if there are any divergent opinions in the team or different understandings of what's been learned in the market engagement process. And that's really good to get those flushed out sooner rather than later. And it brings the team together and makes sure that the team is aligned as they move forward together into the tender and evaluation of bids. Also, as you're going through the evaluation and award process, the document itself can provide what I would call a touchstone. It's a common point of reference. So if, for example, nerves start to get the better of you and think, oh no, we really ought not to be looking at the criteria or the award in this way, you say, well, actually, this is what we said we would do. When we're writing on our award criteria, let's go back and look at why we said we were going to set this type of award criteria. And the feedback we've had from people is that they have found this a really useful process. So here's an example of one of the types of the pro-innovation tendering techniques you might want to apply as part of your pro-innovation tendering strategies. You might say, okay, we're going to use outcome-based, or also known as functional specifications. And here's just a couple of examples of what that might look like. However, although that would be the usual and the norm in to have an outcome-based specification, there are some exceptions to that rule. For example, if you as a city authority have made a policy decision that you're going to move to fuel cell buses, and that you have done, and also a sort of hydrogen network of refueling for those buses, then you're not going to want to put out an outcome-based specification looking for low carbon buses. You are actually going to want to specify fuel cell technology, even though that would be the procurement of an innovative solution. So again, no innovation procurement is unique. Each one of these techniques needs to be thought about and considered in the light of your particular innovation procurement project. Another technique is dialogue-based procedure, such as competitive dialogue. And I just tend to be of the view that there's a bit of a mythology around competitive dialogue, saying that it takes too long, it's too difficult, it opens us up to complaint. I've never seen that happen. I've always seen it as a very positive, efficient process, particularly in the context of an innovation procurement process. A lot of the dialogue that you might have gone through has been basically, you've gone through it basically through the market engagement process itself. Or you may have used a technical dialogue process to refine your requirement before going out to tender. So a lot of that volume, if you like, is taken out. And the approach that we've often used with competitive dialogue is to do a written stage, followed by a sort of meeting stage, so that you're not setting out with competitive dialogue meetings with every single person. You've actually been through a round of eliminating the lower scoring bids or the non-compliant bids that were coming through. And there is a general feeling out there that it is a very positive technique for delivering innovation, more, as it says here, more innovative and responsive solutions, and also delivering good value for the public sector. Another technique is incorporating pilots, trials and demonstrations actually within the procurement process itself. We've talked a couple of times within this webinar series about how prototypes and pilots often don't make it through to procurement, and all that energy is wasted and lots of really good solutions are missed. What we've always encouraged is to bring any pilots and trials, demonstrations within the procurement process itself. And this is something that could always be done, but the innovation partnership procedure that was brought forward as a new procedure in the 2014 directives is a really good way of doing that. And hopefully we're running a webinar next year on innovation partnerships. I'd also mention that DG Grow at the moment is running a series of webinars on innovation partnerships, which I'd encourage you to link into. But it could also be a single conditional contract where your first stage is, okay, we really like your solution, but it's new and you need to prototype it. So we will work with you in a kind of co-creation process, and we'll have a fixed price for that. And then we'll say, okay, we'll have a contract that says also, if all the evaluation criteria are met and we agree that this solution is working, then our contract will say that then we get the go ahead to go to stage two, which is the actual procurement of that solution, having already fixed the price beforehand. The award criteria are a really important part of a pro-innovation tendering strategy. So what we're looking at is balanced, non-price-based award criteria based on factors other than price alone. And here we also have a really good example from Poland, from my colleague Marcin, where they used a really clever staged process of technical dialogue based on outcomes. So they had a series of outcome-based criteria: economic, reduction of carbon, easily applicable within hospitals, at achieving the aim, which was to ensure thermal comfort and sustainability requirements, and meet any legal requirements. So these were the criteria. Taking people through a technical dialogue and then actually saying, okay, these are the people that we can take through to a tendering process where we've refined, based on our dialogue, what it is that we're looking for. And that worked really well, and they had got a highly innovative, cost-effective solution that everyone was really delighted in. Another technique is the use of total cost of ownership, and again, I think this is really important. Rather than looking at the purchase price, actually looking at, okay, how much is it going to cost us to run this? Let's take the example of a piece of imaging equipment. What's its efficiency rating in terms of energy? How long does it take to warm up? Because what we find is with the imaging equipment, this was an example that came from Erasmus Medical Centre. When they looked into this, they found that people were not switching off their scanners between almost overnight even, because they took so long to warm up. So these are things we have to take into account. And also, how much is this company going to charge us for maintenance? We want clarity on what this total cost is going to be, not just what it's going to cost to actually, the price that it's actually going to cost to buy. And we also look at collaborative mechanisms. And this means one of the things that I mentioned in the forward commitment procurement process is that throughout the process, we always encourage building wider demand. And very often that's through peer networks, who are actually saying, okay, to your colleagues in neighbouring hospitals, colleagues that you may have linked in with other European projects, have you got the same need as us? Because that would be really useful for us to demonstrate to suppliers that we're not alone, that that there are also other people out here who recognise that they have this unmet need. And again, the example from Poland is that some really effective reaching out to other hospitals made it possible to say that, okay, 8 other hospitals are interested in this. And at the end of the process, what we definitely saw is that there was a huge amount of interest in rolling out this solution among that network with other people. Within EcoQuip, this is something that EcoQuip Plus, this is something that we we really want to focus on, because it is challenging. We would like to bring together actual buyers groups. And so what we've done is created a collaborative buyers forum. And if you'd be interested in joining that, it's not about it saying, oh yeah, we'll commit to buy with you. It's actually saying, okay, can we share together what our unmet needs are? Can we find out what other people's innovation procurements are and support them in doing that? Maybe join in with their market engagement activities. So finally, I just wanted to mention a really important feature of pro-innovation tendering, which is it's all about motivating and rewarding suppliers. Think about the tendering process from the point of view of the suppliers, and remember at this stage, you'll have seen and heard from quite a lot of potential suppliers across the supply chain, so you'll have a much better idea. You'll have asked them some interesting questions about what can we do to support you bringing your innovative solution forward? What are the barriers that you're facing? So we need to take the response of those questions into account in this tendering process. One example that people tend to use, and I'd say this comes, I think I've seen this mainly in sustainable procurement, is the use of minimum standards. And I think that can be really useful in sustainable procurement, because you can ensure that you get to a certain standard. But the problem of minimum standards in innovation procurement is that it provides a disincentive for suppliers to go beyond that unless they can see that you understand that to do that they need a clear competitive advantage. So, for example, a simple thing to do is say, we will reward, this is our minimum standard, but we will reward suppliers that exceed these standards. And another thing that I would also mention here is probably what I call pro-innovation contracting, which is building a sense of progressive improvement into the contract as well. So that I think that's something we can actually still be driving innovation, particularly in longer term contracts. So what I want to do, having looked at a few sort of techniques and principles that you could put into your pro-innovation tendering strategy, is look at a couple of case examples. And this was a case example from the Erasmus Medical Centre in Rotterdam. And it's all about bed washing. And bed washing is really important to the hospital. Now, this is a hospital that was very cleverly basically rebuilt on the same site while maintaining their operations. So they were moving from an older building into a real beautiful state-of-the-art university medical centre. And in their old building, they used to wash beds through what they jokingly called a car wash. And this was the cartoon that they drew to get across this idea is, yeah, at the moment we just put them through this car wash. It uses a lot of detergent and water, it's a lot of time, it's quite noisy, it has to be in the basement. It's a bit of a problem for us, and it certainly doesn't seem appropriate to be moving that kind of solution into our new state-of-the-art facility. So saying, okay, this is an opportunity for an innovation procurement project. We've got a new hospital. The machine anyway is coming to the end of the life. We think it's really resource inefficient, and anyway, they don't make this bed washing facility anymore, so we couldn't buy a new one even if we wanted to. As part of our sustainability programme, we've got some targets, resource and energy efficiency and carbon reduction. And our hygiene experts are telling us that actually what we need in this modern era of healthcare is a process that can confirm that the beds are clean. So we need an auditable process. So they've defined their unmet need as a sustainable and low carbon solution to deliver 70,000 clean beds and mattresses a year. They went through the process, they'd engaged stakeholders, they launched a market engagement, and this was 4 years before the solution was needed, because as we know, innovation takes time in the majority of cases. They developed their outcome-based functional specification. They elected to use the competitive dialogue procedure, and they set award criteria of strategic fit for the hospital, carbon footprint, and total cost of ownership. And this was a radical departure from their usual price-based approach. The solution that came forward was brilliant. It was a robotic bed washing solution, brand new to the market, developed in co-creation with the team, and with considerable benefits. So I think we've got time. I'm just going to show you hopefully show you a video of the solution in action. So yeah, they were really pleased with that. It was a really interesting process actually that they went through. It was a really, I think they found it quite an intense co-creation process, and both of the teams worked really closely together. And there's some really interesting technology that came through. Particularly interesting was the way in which this is an SME, a Dutch SME, that actually brought forward solutions from the automotive sector, the robotic system, and then designed obviously the programming, but also, you know, precision nozzles so that they could make sure that everything was being cleaned, auditing processes. And then they realized, of course, well, we're cleaning the beds, we can program this to clean anything. So they started using it to clean wheelchairs, food trolleys, and that kind of thing. The key, I think, to the success of this was not only the way in which the project had been set up. They set it up with a really solid foundation in the beginning. They set up something called a decision-making unit and made sure that everybody who needed to be involved was involved right from the beginning. And there was the phrase that my colleague Joram Nauta used was, we made sure that anybody that could say no was involved and engaged in this process. So they had this solid foundation. But the other key to success was the fact that they understood that there was no point just buying a prototype. They needed to buy it as part of this two-stage conditional contract that we talked about earlier. And so they that meant that there was this opportunity to work together. That was co-funded. So that was co-funded by the SME, that prototyping, the SME and Erasmus co-funded it. It was helpful, of course, for Erasmus that was funding that was from the European Commission. So that made it, again, quite relatively easy for them to co-fund this prototype. But then to actually have that smooth ease through right into first adoption. Because without those first adopters, I'd say many of these innovative solutions will fail. So it was a really, really interesting project, and I think they deserved it. They won the European Commission's first Innovation Procurement Award. The outcomes were great, you know, as well as the process being a really interesting one. They got a 65% reduction in their carbon footprint. They got a 35% reduction in total cost of ownership from the previous solution. They got this replicable, auditable cleaning of beds, so they knew if basically if it has been through this system, it is by definition clean. So yeah, everyone was quite pleased with that. Really useful. I think I've mentioned all this actually now. That this idea of having co-creation with a supplier and getting that continuity of purpose through the prototyping through to tenders. Obviously, of course, now innovation partnerships could provide this. They didn't exist when this project went forward, but innovation partnerships would now provide a similar kind of mechanism to achieve this end-to-end continuity. Again, a reminder that DG Grow has got this really interesting series of webinars on innovation partnerships, and you can find out about that on LinkedIn, or if you can't find it, obviously just let us know and we'll put you in touch with that. Right, another case example. Let me just check where we are on timing. I think we've got time to have a look at this. A very different project looking at a service innovation procurement. And this was a hospital in the UK that had in place a long 15-year catering contract. And this catering contract had been absolutely brilliant in the beginning. But over time, the levels and the standards had declined. And as the Director of Facilities confessed, the only thing we've ever really asked of them is to reduce price. And this just is not very motivating. There was a breakdowns in communication between the nursing staff, facilities and catering. There were conflicts as to what the standards were. It had got to itself into quite a tricky stage. At the same time, this hospital's Rotherham NHS Foundation Trust in the UK had signed up to a public-private procurement compact for committing themselves to work towards zero carbon catering. So applying the full commitment procurement process, getting stakeholders together, coming up with an outcome-based requirement for an innovative, integrated solution, high quality, patient-appropriate meals that are delivered as an integral part of nursing care. And also it had to be obviously low carbon. So they called it people-centered low carbon catering. And the process itself was a really healing process, in that it brought together stakeholders from across departments into the same room to actually talk about their vision for catering, but also to raise concerns that they had. It meant that we had to address conflicts and different opinions in the way forward. But they did in the end find themselves with a shared vision. And that what they were clear about is not only did they want to deliver people-centred low carbon catering, they were clear that they wanted to maintain their on-site kitchen. And in a lot of cases, hospital kitchens have been lost across the UK, which absolutely limits what kind of catering provision you can have. They wanted it to look really carefully at nutrition and understand patients' nutritional intake. And they also wanted to improve the provision for the delivering of catering for its staff. What we were looking, when we talked to stakeholders, they said, well, you know, we're busy nurses and we have to spend, you know, 20 minutes of our break queuing for a sandwich. Can we do better than that? You know, can we actually have a place where we can go away from patients, where we can relax and actually not have to spend time, but perhaps pre-order our lunches or our evening meals. We went through a really interesting, successful market engagement process, but because we're focusing on the tendering, I'll move straight on to that. What we agreed in the tendering strategy is what we want to do is to enable and support innovation in the supply chain and deliver best value to the trust. That's what we want to deliver. We want to follow through with those principles and that vision. And they thought through as what would be the response of suppliers to this. Okay. The award criteria that they came up with was, okay, quality. What is the quality of the people-centred approach? We want progressive improvement in innovation throughout the contract. How's that going to happen? We're going to reward reductions in embedded carbon, and the price based on total cost of ownership will be 30% of the award criteria. I think what was key, and everyone agreed in a sort of post-tendering briefing, is that what was key to the success of this particular project is, although price was part of the award criteria, it was not discussed, it was discussed rather during the competitive dialogue process that they adopted. But they didn't evaluate on price until they got to best and final offers. And that meant any solutions that were coming forward they're just solutions they didn't want, that were, for example, bringing pre-cooked meals for heating on site. They didn't want that, so that could be excluded early on, and it couldn't sneak through on the fact that it was actually going to be a lot cheaper, potentially. So they didn't want to take that risk. That was a really interesting approach. And they got a really good outcome. And one of the outcomes was actually the response of the incumbent supplier. as soon as the incumbent supplier saw what was going on and saw that the hospital brought stakeholders together, was thinking about things in a different way, they actually started to think of ways that they could deliver what was being asked for at the market engagement stage. So they started to look at plate waste reduction. They started to apply for soil association standards, moving towards organic, more organic food. Really interesting. So there was really use. I mean, it's a service contract, so there was a whole range of different things that came through. And the suppliers at the end, in fact, it was the incumbent suppliers that won the contract, but the relationship was transformed in this new contract. And I think significantly, it led to investment by the catering suppliers in actually creating relaxation space, much needed meeting space, provision of Wi-Fi, and still managing to deliver savings of more than €1 million over the first 5 years. So it was really, again, really interesting outcomes, and they were I think they were really pleased with the outcomes that were delivered through that project. So that case study actually brings us to the end of our journey through the forward commitment procurement approach to innovation procurement. I hope that's been of use and of interest to you and has stimulated your own thinking, because I think everybody, I mean, innovation procurement is still relatively new. We're all still learning, and I think we all need to keep learning from each other. And in that way, we'll get even better and better at this as we go on, and hopefully bring more and more people and enthuse more and more people to try out an innovation procurement approach. And what I would say is, although we use the forward commitment procurement process, and we find it a really useful learning tool. Actually, we call it action learning as we go through these projects with our colleagues. There is always going to be variations, and where time might be limited, you might not be able to do all of that process, but you can do some of it. And even small parts of that process can make a big difference to the extent to which you can bring forward innovation and address future needs of your organisation. A reminder also that many of the case studies that we've highlighted are included in our EcoQuip. There's our precursor project, the EcoQuip case study final report, which is on the EcoQuip website. So where do we go from here? Well, we hope you'll stay in touch. Do sign up on the website for our newsletter if you haven't done that already. And webinars in 2021, I think we will actually. We're planning a series of webinars specifically for healthcare managers. I think based on the idea that we would really like to see procurement considered more of a strategic function within the healthcare sector, and it's really important then to have healthcare managers that understand the role and potential of procurement. We're planning some invited speakers. We'll go through more case examples, probably from outside as well as inside the health sector. And specifically, I think we'll aim to run a webinar on innovation partnerships. And that's it, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. And I think, Hayley, if we've got some short time left for some questions, we could move on to that.
Yeah, we don't have any specific questions that have been asked, Gaynor, but one of our guests has mentioned a role play exercise that he found very useful, that was kind of conducted within his organisation, I think a few years ago, where it involved scenarios where buyers presented tenders to sellers on one day, and then on the next day the roles were reversed. And he said actually it was really, really useful in improving the tendering quality and understanding the different perspectives. So that's quite interesting. I don't know if you have any comments or have any experience of that type of thing.
Sounds brilliant. That sounds absolutely fantastic. I'm going to do that. And we'll creative about how we do it online, I guess, for the foreseeable future. But now I think that sounds excellent. I'd love to find out more. I really would. If there's possibility of having an offline conversation about that, I'd really enjoy that. So please do get in touch. And indeed, you know, getting these examples written up, and perhaps we could share it if you could make sort of a few paragraphs, we could share it on the forum, would be great. So thanks very much for that.
That's great. And the person who noted that has said he's happy for anyone to get in touch. So so that's really useful, and I'm sure we will be in touch. Mick, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions that have come in now. Do you have some recommendations on how to engage citizens in public procurement of innovation as we're all learning? I feel it is a complex process that market players are getting used to. What kinds of basic information do you think is interesting to start touching base with citizens?
I'm just trying to understand what's meant by citizens in that.
I'm not 100% sure.
Well, we could talk about meaning. No, I don't suppose we do, actually. I mean, in terms of citizens, what people involved, not just patients. Oh, right, okay. Stakeholder engagement was basically what I think we would call it. Any particular tips? Well, we had some really interesting ideas. I think that part of that stakeholder engagement is first foremost of actually working out who the stakeholders are. And this is really thinking much more broadly and bringing together cross-departmental teams. And so if you take the example of the catering project, we actually brought together a nurse representative. So we had head nurse who ran focal groups among nursing staff, and then brought the results of that to our project team. So we allocated various tasks. We had always make sure that we had in that catering project the nutritionists and the dietitians really plugged into that and represented on the project team. We made sure that we got the communication people involved, so the communication department. So that was external communication. Catering can be quite a hot topic amongst the public in the UK, so we felt it was really important on the external communication on catering, but also they supported us on the internal communication of what was going on. And we ran a series of surveys that people could say, what is it that you like, what is it you don't like about the catering on offer. And that was really important in understanding how we could improve the provision to staff. So a whole range of different type of mechanisms, and probably the most, weirdly, the most effective one. Sometimes the head of procurement and I would just have a walk around and talk to people, where they would just sort of like water cooler conversations with people, was really useful as well. In these times, we're starting to think about how we can run interactive focus groups online, and our colleagues from EMA have been introducing us to some really interesting and useful techniques of how we can run workshops and have people interacting in an online environment as well. So I guess that brings another challenge to us. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. We did, if you missed the webinar on stakeholder engagement, it is on the website and there are some slides available on that. Simona, I see that you've got a question there. Would you have suggestions of materials specifically useful for making hospital managements understand PPI? I really wish I did, Simona. I really wish I did. Not yet. I think it's a case of watching this space. We're really blessed in this project to have as partners EMA, European Healthcare Managers Association, and I think we'll be able to pull on their knowledge and understanding of healthcare managers. And also you, Simone, I suspect we'll be coming to you and getting your advice. We're going to try with these webinars, and I think keeping things short and sweet with healthcare managers would be quite useful. And perhaps also if we can find enthusiasts within particular hospital, or and actually talk to them about putting together materials and examples. I think for healthcare managers, probably examples are going to speak more than principles, if you see what I mean. So I think when we did a workshop some time ago together in Bologna, we focused very much on these were the really positive outcomes and these were the cost savings, because very often it's the cost savings that will be speaking to people. Perhaps also we can reflect on what challenges COVID-19 has put in front of us. And perhaps we could develop some examples of how innovation procurement can address those problems going forward.
Thanks, Gaynor. There's just one more question, which if you can answer it in about 30 seconds would be great. When you speak about competitive dialogue, is it what is called negotiated tender process? Is it the same?
Yeah,
it's the same thing. Or, yeah,
it's the same sort of approach. And we have competitive dialogue and competitive dialogue with negotiation. Some distinguishing factors on that. I think what we'll do actually, when we do the webinar on innovation procurement, we'll invite a procurement lawyer along who will talk about the different procedures and their impact on innovation procurement. So watch this space. We'll probably aim to do that early in the new year, sort of January, February time.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you very much, Gaynor. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you found it useful and interesting. As we've mentioned, this is the last in the current webinar series. We may run these again in 2021, bigger and better. But we will, as Gaynor mentioned, be running other events and activities. So if you are interested in following the EcoQuip Plus project and finding out more about the Collaborative Buyers Forum or the events and webinars that we'll be running, please do register your interest via the website, and we very much hope to see you again in the future. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to Gaynor for all of your insights, both today and in the other webinars, and I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Hayley. Bye. Bye, everyone.